to another episode of the Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. I'm your host, Christian A. Stetler. I'm very fortunate to be joined by Kyle Hillman. How you doing today, Kyle?
I'm doing good. It's a little turkey stuffed, dealing with the food coma, but otherwise good. It's really good.
Yeah, I'm feeling the exact same way. And, you know, um, I almost got hit by a car with my whole family this morning. In between, when I was chatting with you earlier, we went for a walk with the dog. And we were taking a walk across the crosswalk, and I think she was a Japanese tourist, and she taking a right turn, didn't see us, and I screamed. So I mean, it was the scariest I've ever been in a situation with my kids, and my my youngest actually, like the three of us went to the right, and somehow I thought she was holding my hand, but I can't remember what happened. And she went to the left, and she screamed bloody murder, and I thought for sure I saw blood and
Oh,
all that flash before my eyes. So I'm still a little bit like I got whiplash from and like just rattled from it. But other than that, I'm doing all right too. But I got
this
this turkey
this will be a
coma.
fun conversation. Uh,
Yeah.
well,
Well, first of all, I just wanted to open it up and say, I know I've told you this before, but thank you for the how we connected in the beginning and opened up an opportunity for me to go to the NASW Chicago, participate on the panel with several other, really cool social, I don't know what you want to call them, influencers or just folks that are sharing their stories and their ideas on social media and podcasts. And I've had all of them on, well, three of the four on the
yeah,
podcast in the last couple months, and I got Lashana coming up next. So I just want to say thank you. That was just such a wonderful opportunity and a great experience.
honestly, I think we were blessed to have you there. Like this is one of the things that I wanted to do when the national office said, "Hey, do you want to help with this conference?" Because it was coming to Chicago. I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." But here's some of the things that I want to do, and that was to bring in some new voices. Now, I wasn't successful all the way across the board. I'm not going to pretend like there's some institutional processes that we still have to dismantle or work around. But getting some social media folks there to tell their stories, to just experience that environment and get access to some new people, like that was mission critical number one. And so I wish we could have done more. Like I wish we could have found some sponsors and stuff to help offset some of those costs that you guys took on. But to get you there, like yeah, it was something that was core to what I wanted to have happen. So I was so excited that it actually worked out.
Yeah, well, I mean, even if it was $1,000 plus to get into the conference, if I remember right, and just even having that, and the privilege, and I don't know what it costs for a vendor. I didn't even look, but for to have a table and to be a vendor, I'm sure it was even more
Yeah, it's like
expensive. So
1,700 or something for a table. So yeah, it's costly,
yeah,
but it was great to have you guys there.
yeah. So I mean, it's almost $3,000 privilege. So yeah, I think that it was a great success. And for me, I think just in line with doing these podcasts, it really aligned the same way as in that the best thing about it is all the connections and the community that I've been able to create, and I know people all over the globe, and that just added a whole nother list. And I met other people at the conference as well, that I've been able to connect with. So big thank you and for the work that you're doing and getting this out there like that. I really appreciate it. It was really cool.
Yeah, no, I think the thanks go to you guys for coming, but yeah, I thank you. Thanks for the
Yeah.
compliment, but I think it was having you guys there actually helped our conference more than the other way around. So I appreciate it.
Yeah. Right on. Well, I do see we got some people in the audience, despite the holiday. So if you're out there and you want to chime in, feel free to call in or put it in the chat if you have a question or want to contribute in any way. But we got a lot of good things to talk about. But first of all, I just wanted to get to know you a little bit. So you've been affiliated with the NASW for over a couple of decades. How'd you get into that in social work in general?
So that's a great question. So yeah, no, this is my 22nd year at NASW, and I will tell you, Christian, it was supposed to be a 2-year job. Like when I applied it for to work at NASW, I was like, I'll work for the 2 years, get some knowledge in, and then move on. And I have to say, it's been the best job I've ever had. Literally advocating for social workers, for the values, for the issues, for social justice stuff, for child welfare, for aging. Like I get to be a lobbyist that gets to sleep at night. And I've got good friends who lobby for, say, utilities or gaming or some other, cigarettes, tobacco. And I know it's a job, but like I get to advocate for like how do we get free tuition for foster kids, right?
Mhm.
How do we end conversion therapy in Illinois? And so, what was supposed to be a 2-year job turned into a much longer, uh, multi-decade position. Uh, I started actually in the arts world, strangely enough, um, and I was doing legislative work for um, one of the major large theater companies here in Chicago, Looking Glass, and they moved into this historic landmark building. It was kind of like a water tower place, and so um, I spent the first couple of years, learning the systems by kind of navigating Mayor Daley at the time's senior leadership and trying landmarks and fire department and you name it, like the politics of inner city government. And so um, I did that for the first couple of years, and then I was like, I want to work for social workers and learn that space. And so I started working there, and the rest of it's been 22 years later.
Yeah.
I'm still here. Yeah.
Well, I've only been I mean, I was into social work without knowing it was social work or without any education for like 20 years, but I've only been I think I graduated with my BSW 10 years ago, so like flirting with like 13 or 14 years. And it's changed a lot just in my time and especially, you know, post pandemic, I guess you'd say with some of those changes. And what have you seen? What have you seen that's evolved and changed the most over the years, like negative, positive?
I think probably the thing that concerns me the most has changed is that I feel like social work has moved way too into the clinical space, and have abandoned the advocacy piece of it. Like one of the things I
Mhm.
say, Christian, when I go into classes and I talk to them around policy or legislative work, is that if you just want to do clinical work, go be a counselor. Now, let me be clear that the professors and the deans don't really love it when I say that, like change your major, but I was like, this is what at its core, you're supposed to be doing the advocacy piece too, right? It's the whole world perspective. And I think
Mhm.
what's been really disappointing, I think, as we go forward is that as social work has found more resources and more money in the clinical space, um, a large segment has abandoned the macro policy side of it. And it's kind of like, no, I'm a clinical professional. No, you're a social worker. That means that's part of your day, right? Like I think
Mhm.
we failed when we didn't advocate that as we talk about somebody's workload, a teacher gets prep time, right? Social work should get advocacy time. They really should. It's part of their schedule,
Yeah.
right? So like advocate for those agencies, advocate for the clients of your agencies, right? Like there should be that built in and it just isn't. And so I think what we've seen is a slow gradual away from this is part of my job. And it's very much blurred the lines between an LCPC and an LCSW, right? Like they're pretty much the
Mhm.
same now. And that's disappointing because the value add I think that social workers have, the thing that I always say, like it makes no sense to be a counselor. No offense to the counselors, but it makes no sense to be that because what a social worker can do is so vast. But if you give up that value add, right? If you give up what makes you different, um, then that line start blurring a little too much. And I think that's been the most disappointing piece of I think when we look at what's happened to social work.
Yeah, and that's interesting because when I went to grad school, it was at University of Hawaii, and I had these grand ideas, more macro level. Went in there, did I was only there for a year, and at the end of our cohort before we were about to graduate, we had to stand up in front of the class um, and say what we'd learned, or I don't remember exactly, but reflect what anymore. And what I meant by that, my professor's eyes lit up, and she was pretty upset with me. But what I meant by that was that I felt that I had these other ideas of what social work could be or should be, or what it used to be, even maybe, and that the only thing that they were trying to funnel me down is either to be a caseworker or a therapist, and I didn't want to be either of those things. Not to diss either of them. My wife's a clinical social worker, but I just didn't want to be it, and then I felt like there wasn't a place, and I got drawn back in through education, so that's good. But then I also hear from my students that come in. I'm just at the bachelor's level, but these bachelor's level students, they come in and they also have grand ideas. Some of them want to be a therapist, but a lot of them have these other ideas, and they come in and they slowly become disillusioned with what is available to them. And you're right, like the I don't know what it is, the economic sense or whatever, but That's the idea of being a funneled towards a therapist, and then you see these advertisements for like, hey, you can make $100,000. You just got to see like 50 clients a week. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. No, and look, I think that the profitability of social work is gonna go through some ups and downs in the next few years too. But uh, yeah, and I think you can be both, right? I think even the clinical folks, the folks that are like, I just want the clinical track, right? I don't want to do the policy track. I just want a clinical track.
Hmm.
But the thing that differentiates you from an MFT, the thing that separates you from an LCPC, right, is that you're looking at that whole world picture, that you're going to advocate for those clients, that you're going to advocate for better conditions, right? And if you give that up, what's the difference? Why did you go to social work school? And I think when we talk about, agency directors are worried about the bottom line and how many clients we can see. We're worried about efficiencies. We're worried about like that aspect of it, but we're not taking that break to say, no, you hired a social worker for a reason. You hired that social worker because they had that experience and that they could be that for you. Um, and so, yeah, I don't know. I just think that that's the piece that social work can't give up on, and they've got to, hopefully that next generation can understand like this is the space that you should be in. This is your separator.
Yeah. Alicia, she's a clinical lead. She says, I love that idea of advocacy time. I have to advocate for my clinicians to get time to advocate and resource. When you're in the clinical space, the expectation of back to back clients totally kills it. And it's true. You don't even have time to do that, really, oftentimes.
Right. 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 Yeah, we can talk about
Yeah.
that too at some point, but that's one of the concerns I have with AI, to be honest with you, is the efficiencies are are starting to replace good quality care. And that's a problematic space for social workers to be in too. But we can talk about that in a minute.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about AI.
All right.
Um,
Let's
I I talked to, like I said mentioned, I talked to she calls herself the AI social worker, and she was really sweet and nice, and had a lot of, she was pretty open minded about things, but a big advocate for AI and social work. And one of the things we talked about was I teach practice this semester, teaching motivational interviewing, solution focused interviewing, and always trying to find different ways, to be able to, because it's an online class, so I'm trying to find different ways for them to get experience. And she mentioned that you might want to try using a AI for it, and so I really had never used the voice option for Chat GPT. And so all I did was I just started talking to it, and I said, hey, can you help me set up a thing for my 9 students to practice? And I tried to model it for them at first, but I quit like within 3 4 minutes in, because it felt so unhuman, if that makes sense. It
right.
felt terrible to me. I didn't had no motivation to talk to it anymore. So what are your thoughts on it? Like, you know a lot more about it than I do. So where are we
Yeah.
at, and
I
what's
I mean,
the
I'll be honest with you. I'm not a huge proponent of social work and AI. I think there's spaces for social work AI. I think we need to be careful how we're using that, and that this is not. And I'm gonna have this conversation outside of the environmental risks and the other things that we should probably be talking about when
yeah.
we're talking about using AI. It's like how many resources we're using to actually use this. Like that's a whole
Mhm.
different aspect of it that I think social work should be aware of and conscious of. But when I talk about AI, like I think this is a place where we need to pump the brakes really, really fast. I think that this is the shiny thing on the hill that people are chasing, and I don't think that this is in the best interest of social workers, but I don't think it's in the best interest of your clients either. And
Mhm.
so, to be honest with you, that was the first thing that I did last year was we I drafted bills both in Nevada and in Illinois and passed legislation in Nevada and Illinois to ban AI therapist chatbots. So to make sure that the client is seeing a clinical professional, an individual, and not an algorithm that was designed by a tech bro who used to be in the real estate space, right? Which is an actual product, by the way. Um, and so I went after this from approach of like, hey, we need to pump the brakes on this space. We need to make sure that um that clinical therapists are making the determinations. And that's not what's happening, and that's not what's being pushed by these companies. I think social work's got to wake up to the fact that private equity and venture capital funds are coming really, really hard into your space. Uh, and what you do in these moments determines how fast they're able to move and how well they're able to move in those spaces. And so, like for example, I'll say in the Illinois bill, we put in a requirement that social workers had to review all case notes and documents that were created by AI. If you're going to use it for administrative purposes, you have to review it. That seems like pretty simple, right, Christian? Like I think like we'd all agree,
Mhm.
like the clinical person should be reviewing it. Except that's not how it's actually being pushed right now. Like there are companies out there that are saying this AI can listen in on your therapy session, it can draft your notes, right? And it can automatically submit to billing. You don't ever see it. And they're advertising this as an efficiency, right? With the
Mhm.
idea of if we do this efficiently, you yourself, you the clinician can see more clients and look at we're providing more care. But that isn't creating that time for you to review those case notes to realize, are they even right? Has the AI hallucinated? Are you committing billing fraud at this moment? Right? Like there's some things that we haven't put into place because of the drive to make social work so efficient that we take out the clinical care piece of it to make it more profitable. And the driver of that is private equity, right? The driver of it is
Yeah.
if you want to take a look at what the bad things of private equity and behavioral health, take a look at behavior analysts on the East Coast, right? Just do a Google search for behavior analyst, venture capital, behavior analyst, private equity, and you're going to see the horror stories of how those workers are no longer have that kind of autonomy to kind of decide what's in the best interest of the client. It's about how many clients can I see in a very short period of time, right? Following a specific
Mhm.
route that drives the most amount of revenue for that a private equity firm. That's coming for social work too, and it's already we're already starting to see it. And so the question that I have is like even if we're using it for administrative purposes, right? a- At what point do you use what makes mental health that individual response with a clinic with a client? At what point do you lose that individuality to AI? At what point, Christian, do we no longer are providing that kind of interpersonal communication, that inner conversation, and we're really just following CBT, um, according to a book, not about what's happening in front of you, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm a private equity firm and I can get you to see another 10 clients, I'm going to let you see another 10 clients by using AI to do your notes. And if I'm a private equity firm, I'm not going to want you to look through them. I'm not going to want you to spend time thinking about that. And then it goes back to this other thing, which is where I talk about like how teachers have prep time. Sometimes your notes are when those clinicians have the time to think through their case, right?
Mhm.
What happened in those sessions, what should I try next, what are things that I should do, and if we remove those for efficiency purposes, then what did those sessions start looking like, right? Like
Yeah,
I,
and you oh, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say you lose the humanity of it, the human side of it, and I think one example that's different but the same is you just gotta go read LinkedIn posts and how they all sound the exact same. They all are in the exact they're framed the exact same way, and, like, it just it gets old real quick to read the way that everybody's writing, and so if you talk about writing, do people lose the writing skills over time? You think about teenagers or kids that are using it. By the time they get to adults, are they even able to write anything? And are we losing the capacity to? Because I see really intelligent people posting stuff that's just, what looks to me like AI drivel. If you know what I'm saying, it's not this, it's this. It says the
Right,
same
right,
thing
right, right,
every single time.
right.
Uh,
No,
Alice said,
the other
sorry.
thing is too, Christian, I'm not I don't know. There's a part of me that's advocating that I don't know that students need to know how to write anymore. You need to know how to critical think. I don't even know if you need to know how to write anymore. Like I think we're getting to that point. I agree with you, right? Like the AI
Mhm.
content is really, really hard to read these days, right? But at the same time, like I think that we're getting past the point of where when I was a kid, and this is a long, long time ago, where professors would hand me a paper with page limits and how many words, and we had to like
Mhm.
create the. And so I'm just creating nonsense to fill time.
Yeah.
And what I think which is more important, which is can you do that work and how you do that work, and can you critically think about that work? Like that's where we've got to refigure out. I don't want to go on that tangent, but I'm just letting you know, like I'm not even sure that we need to anymore. Like there are certain skills, like they used to tell us that you're not going to have a calculator everywhere you go. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. right?
Yeah.
And so I, I wouldn't be. I'm not anti AI from a like a. It's here, Christian.
Mhm.
It's going to be here. I think students need to understand how to use it, understand what it is, what what not to use it. But I think the thought makers and the policy drivers, they need to start thinking a little bit more critically about, is this in our best interest, and what is good clinical care. Just because they can write your therapy notes for you doesn't mean that that's in the best interest of that client, right? If you're not spending the time to have that conversation with yourself, to be like, what did I just hear? What just happened? What should I do next? um, if you're just worried about, can I get my soap notes in, then sure, let AI handle that, right? Like and I will
Mhm.
also say this, just so some folks that are listening hear this: the the AI um taking your notes, man, that is a liability risk on liability risks, right? Like, this is a trial lawyer's dream, and I just want to, like, this is something that's not being said because folks are, like I said, they're getting first to the hill, and they're just pushing this out to social workers and other clinicians, right? But everything that you put into that system is discoverable by lawyers. So right now, your personal notes are not discoverable, right? Like, the little hand on, when you put it into your soap notes, those are discoverable. Literally everything that the AI does is going to be discoverable. So now let's take a step back and say, these folks are using AI to do their therapy notes. They're listening in on your sessions, oftentimes without the client even knowing. And then the computer is creating a transcript, a written transcript of that whole entire conversation. That whole transcript is now discoverable by trial attorneys. And what's not in the transcript are those quiet moments, right? It's those silent moments. It's those important moments in clinical care, by the way. But so, like, if you were Christian, let's hypothetically say you, Christian, were like, um, you would joke about suicide as a, and early on in our sessions, we talk about it, and your clinician care, your therapist says, "Hey, Christian, that's not a joking matter, right? Like, this is not something we should be talking about. Is this serious?" And they go through the protocols. Flash forward 6 months later, now I'm using AI to record my sessions, and you make a joke, and your therapist looks at you and gives you that look. You know that look, right? The look of, like, we talked about this already.
Mhm.
That's not written in your transcript. That entire transcript will be shown as proof that you didn't take this serious if something were to happen, right? Like, there's huge liabilities to this, and I'm not saying that there's not ways to work around this. The folks that are using it absolutely should have some kind of retention policy to get rid of some of these things. Um, I think there's one company that was actually advertising that they'll save all your sessions for eternity. And so that way, if a client says something 2 years later, it'll, AI will reflect. No, delete those stuff. You know, like, there's some ethical responsibilities about what happens if that product gets hacked, if that product is sold, where that data is going, how that data is being used. Two data sets, Christian, that I don't think people understand, that are really sought after by companies right now. One is individuals with mental health issues, and the other is women that have been sexually assaulted. And the reason that data set is sought after is those individuals are most likely to impulse buy trips, large purchases, expensive items, luxury items, right? And so they're actually seeking out this kind of data set to drive ad sales to those individuals, because they're not in a space that could look at the consequences of those purchases, or those elements. And so, like, as social workers, if you're using AI and you're using them for therapy notes, you're putting in your clients' information so that you can try to get treatment plan ideas, right? Like, all of that is just being collected, sold, resold, um, and that's where I say, like, at some point we just need to pump the brakes and say, like, how do we ethically want to use this product, if at all, and how do we relay that to our clients, how this products are being used, and make sure that there's a little bit of informed consent here, so that we're not making the decisions that are going to traumatize or make things worse for that client in the future, when their data is sold on the internet, when they start receiving advertisements for certain products. This is the place where I know some folks that are really excited about AI and the possibilities of AI, and I think there's a place for that research to be done. But as clinicians, man, I hope people just enter this space a little more cautious than they are right now.
Yeah, well, I hadn't thought about it from that perspective, and what you just described sounds like some pretty nefarious shit, to be honest with you. You know,
But it's happening. It's
yeah.
absolutely like, this is not like a what if. This is already happening now, right? We already have trial lawyers that are pulling your entire transcripts to prove something that maybe didn't happen, but based on the transcripts, you can make that logical jump. We're already seeing data sets being sold on wellness apps. Anything that individuals are putting into ChatGPT, 100% is sellable, right? Like there's no HIPAA controls for ChatGPT. There's no HIPAA controls for all these large language models, Gemini, whatever that you're putting in. All of that, when we see the data of how many youth are using these large language models, all of the data that they're putting into is absolutely being sold to in companies and large organizations so that they can repurpose those, right? And
Hmm.
the other thing too, Christian, that scares me a lot about this is who's putting their thumb on the scale, right? So there, one of the states actually has an AI predictor for child welfare. Who built that? What are the biases into it? And who's putting their thumb on the scale? Right? That is going to say, hey, this child is most likely to be harmed, so we should take them into the system. Right. Well, this when we also take a look at like what's happening with just clinical care, who's putting their thumb on the scale of your soap notes that the AI is creating? Is it the private equity that's going to say like, no, you know what, group would be good for this guy, but you know what, we're gonna do individual because individual pays more, right? Or is it the
Hmm.
reverse? Is it insurance companies? Are they going to put their thumb on the scale and say, hey, you know what, I know individual would be good, but let's just prescribe a wellness app. This person doesn't need to see care, right? Like, so there's a lot of things that go into this space that are happening now. I mean, insurance companies are using AI right now to deny claims. Insurance companies are using AI right now to look for clawbacks for clinical care. So the system isn't set up for you for social workers to win in this space. They're actually using AI and no longer using individuals to look for clawbacks. They're looking for anything that they can claw back up to 18 months in some states. So like we're playing in a game that we don't understand yet. And that scares me. It absolutely scares me for this space. Um, I mean, how many of these sessions that are being recorded that you think you're doing because you can make, it'll make you doing notes really fast, right? You can. Nobody wants to do notes. I get it, but how many of these sessions you're recording are actually feeding the next model that's going to replace you? How many? I'm willing to bet most of them are. I'm willing to bet unless you have an agreement with that company that keeps the data on your side of the server, which I'm getting most people don't. Um, that's that's training a learning model.
Hmm. Well, Kyle, from your perspective or from what you know, what can we do about it? What can I teach my students? How can I make a difference in this area? Because I'm telling you, what I'm hearing, I'm alarmed.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, I think we need to be really, really cautious never to put in client information into a system that can be stored from an AI model. So if you're going to ask AI for what are some ideas, let's say we have client X and you think client X may be bipolar, and so you might want to ask uh, ChatGPT or some other hopefully better trained model. What are some things that you can work through for somebody who has bipolar? Don't what we're seeing, which is scaring me, which I think the students need to be aware of, is not to put my client has these things. My client said these things. This was leading me to that space because all of that data could then be re-identified. I don't care if you don't say their name; it could be re-identified based on trends, right? So I think there's a space there. I think agencies, large folks who are going into those agencies, I think you should be aware when you're talking about mental health AI that data needs to have destruction. You need to make sure that that's contractual destruction, so that it's not feeding into those algorithms, that it's not being stored, that it's not going to be leaked. Um, and quite honestly, I just think that if I'm a student now And I'm going into this space. I think you need to be aware of what AI can do and where AI shouldn't do, and I think that you need to advocate for those lines, right? Like, you're getting a master's degree, you're doing clinical care, you're doing supervised hours. Um, you need to be able to define what it is that you provide that is distinctly different than just a rote algorithmic response. And then you need to fight for that, because I think as we go forward, I think fighting for prep time or whatever we're going to call this thing, you know, for clinical care, so that we don't become what's happening, in Medicaid dentistry. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but Medicaid dentistry is like you've got 20 minutes. That's all I'm giving you. And if we discover new things, you're going to have to schedule another 20 minutes. And the reason is so I can jam pack as many of these sessions in as possible and make the most amount of money. We have to fight. Like, the next group of students need to be able to fight back and argue, like, no, I need that time to have this conversations. I need that time to think through these clients care. I need that time to build out what I'm going to do next, and advocate for that, because I think the push is going to be for efficiency. The push is going to be for less personal care. And that's a bad spot for you guys to be in, for any clinician to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know, Kyle, man. You got me feeling very, very negative about it all. Very, very concerned.
Like I said, I've used it. I used it to crunch data that's not about, an individual.
Hmm.
Like, so I've done survey responses, and I dump the survey responses into a thing, and have it pick out what are the trends and what are the thoughts and those kind of things. So I'm not 100% against AI. I will tell you though, Christian, when it comes to clinical care, I think we're running too fast towards AI without having the very difficult discussions about where the guardrails need to be and how we need to protect that stuff. And so, you know, um, at minimum, we need to be advocating for the same levels of data protection and client protection that we have in person as we are on these platforms, and that doesn't exist. That doesn't exist. I mean, the old guy from one of the founders from OpenAI, from ChatGPT, basically even said everything that you give to us, none of that's protected by HIPAA. None of it. None of it's protected by privacy. They're not shy about it. That's
Yeah,
sellable.
they sure don't care either. Like,
Not a bit. Not a bit.
yeah, there's too much money in it right now. Um,
Speaking
I
of
just wanted
money,
to get to.
I was going to say
Go
one
ahead.
thing real quick too. Those, like, I think if we don't put some guardrails on this and clamp down on this a little bit more, like Nevada and Illinois already has, like we're
Hmm.
trying to figure out where else we need to go. Uh, I do think what's going to happen is that we're going to see disparities in care get even worse. And so the reality is wealthy individuals who already can do self pay are going to be able to get access to individual care. Low income folks, people in rural areas, folks that have where there's a massive shortage of clinical professionals, they're going to get fed AI garbage. And I think that is just one of those things that's going to just make things absolutely worse for this profession, absolutely worse for those clients. Um, if you don't even care about your own workload or your own pay, the idea that we're going to feed black and brown clients AI, that we're going to feed the rural farmer AI because we don't want to address workforce issues or this is a cheaper alternative, that's a very dangerous premise.
Yeah, and I know we also talked about the compact a little bit, the interstate compact, and if folks aren't aware of that, I'm not an expert on it, but essentially beforehand you're only allowed to practice with folks in your state, and now if you're a part of the compact, then you can, if you're wherever, you could see somebody somewhere else. And I can see some positives in that, like say you lived somewhere and you moved to Hawaii and your clients still wanted to be able to see you. That seems beneficial to me. But what I liken it to is I like to look at it from like in the sense of customer service. If you're as old as we are, then you would have remembered a time when you could call in to say an airline customer service or a credit card or something like that and talk to somebody that actually worked there.
Right.
And slowly but surely, you got somebody in a cubicle that lives somewhere else, oftentimes in another country. And there's a lack of cultural context, if you know what I mean. And so I, have done most of my work in Hawaii and Alaska, where you got um, Native Hawaiians and Alaska Native folks. Very unique. And then in Alaska, you got lots of different tribes and groups of people. And so I look at it as worried that you're going to have a cubicle, a building set up full of cubicles in Utah because it's cheap in Utah, just like how they used to send the kids to treatment in Utah because it was cheaper.
Yep.
And they're going to be seeing somebody, they're going to be trained on cultural competence. And then they're going to be seeing an Alaska Native in Utqiagvik, Alaska. And they're going to think because they're culturally competent that they can work with them. I'm not saying that you can't at all, but like to me, it's a nightmare. And I was just really interested in your perspective on that, especially for those, like you said, black and brown communities, black and brown individuals, Native folks, black folks. What do you see there? What are your
Yeah,
concerns?
yeah, and so I'm not even sure that the therapists in Utah in a few years are going to have cultural competency. So let's be clear, right? Like they went after an Indiana professor recently for daring to have cultural competency in a social work program, right?
Hmm.
So um, I think that the real risk that lies there too, which is if we're if I think of the compact as this, I'm going to preface this as Kyle Hillman's opinion and not my employer's position because they have a different position around the compact. But um, the compact, while there are huge benefits, right? Continuity of care being the biggest one, the clinical and the professional not having to have multiple CEs to match every single state and pay every single fee and navigate that system. The reality with the compact is it's not a workforce bill, it's not a fix, it's a workforce shift, right? And so what it's going to happen is it's going to allow individuals in private practice who do self-pay or high-end clients to seek new high-end clients, right? So they can go into the North Shore of Chicago, the suburbs of New York, etc., and seek out additional clients. So they're going to open those markets that they didn't have. The reverse is also absolutely true, which is if you live in a state that actually pays a higher Medicaid reimbursement, and I know that's a hard thing to imagine, but a higher Medicaid reimbursement rate, or your state is a conscious state and as advocated for better rates for the commercial market for clinical care, those clients are going to be referred to the lowest reimbursement state, and the lowest reimbursement state isn't always the ones that share the same values that your state may have, right? There's certain states that are much cheaper that believe in conversion therapy is a valid form of therapy, right? There are some states that believe certain groups of our population shouldn't even exist here, and we're not looking at that from that perspective. When we get to that compact and we sign that compact, there is no question large agencies, for-profit business, private equity firms aren't going to say, why am I going to hire a therapist from Hawaii that costs a lot of money um, when I could hire a therapist in Alabama at about half the reimbursement rate, right?
Hmm.
And what that's going to do is it's going to say, again, the wealthy individuals will be able to self-pay and be able to find that high-level social worker who targets that population. The lower income or the rural in individuals that are in mental health deserts, those individuals are going to refer to virtual only because you're not going to be able to maintain a practice when most of your clients are referred out of state, and they're going to be virtual only, and they're going to be of a lesser quality and probably from clinicians that don't share the same values or same environment or backgrounds that you have, right? Because this is all
Yeah.
that's available. And I think we're already seeing this in some levels in Medicaid right now, in Medicaid mental health. If you are a black or brown foster kid, the odds of you getting a black and brown therapist are significantly low, significantly low. The fact that you get from someone from your community who's your psych, almost impossible. Like, right, like we've already moved to a system where if you have money and you have resources, you can find good quality care in those spaces, and if you don't, you're already being referred to individuals that don't fit your demographics or understand your cultural significance or neighbor, environment. We add the compact, my biggest fear, and I hope that, like, as we continue to push this compact across the states, I think there's 20 some states that have already passed it. The rules are still being written. That at some point we have the conversation about how do we make sure, though, that if somebody wants to seek out someone from their community in person, that we have the systems in place that still allow that, and that we don't create a system by which um, low income individuals, rural individuals, individuals in deserts are going to be fed, the cheapest response that they can we can get them to. And we're seeing it already in schools. So don't think this is something in the future. It's already something that's happening now, right? We're already seeing it in schools, online, telehealth only mental health, where school social workers are being pushed out and it's being replaced by these private equity funded telehealth school social work things. These individual, not, and it's not even just school social workers, it's a school mental health professional. Um, we're seeing it in these venture capital and private equity companies like Geo Group, right, that does the private prison systems, um, and how they're now looking for an associate mental health professional. Which, by the way, like maybe they have them in some other states, but that's wild to me. That we're going to allow clinical care to youth that are being incarcerated to be an associate's level mental health professional. So the race to the bottom of who can save me the most money, it's already happening. That those systems are already starting to grow. My worry with the compact, Christian, is that we aren't critically thinking about those other things to put protections into place, that it may just put gasoline on the fire. And when you add AI to that and the efficiencies of AI, you're actually just going to add napalm to the fire, right? Like we're just going to blow it all up. Um, and
Mhm.
the individuals that absolutely are going to be hurt are those that don't have the resources to self fund quality care. Period. Right? Those of us with funds are going to be able to deep down and dig down into our wallet and get that that clinician who only does self pay in the future, to get that quality care, and the rest of the folks are going to have this kind of inferior. And we're seeing it with companies that are building wellness apps and the mental health therapy apps, where they're advertising that because workforce is so bad and because people are waiting so long, this could be a logical replacement for clinical care. Um, I can never imagine that those individuals and those companies that make quite significant money would send their loved one who is having a mental health crisis to their AI chatbot. Um, no, they'll self pay to get them care. And the idea that just going to be okay with the shifting low income individuals, rural individuals, individuals in these deserts, um, to inferior products, to telehealth from across the country or overseas, that we're going to be okay with shifting them to AI chatbots, and somehow this is going to produce good results. This is the thing that scares me, Christian. This is the thing that keeps me up every day.
Yeah, and I think what concerns me even further is social work has this way about it. There's obviously individuality and diversity in social work, but social work in general has this thing where we follow the status quo. And whatever the status quo is for the moment, we follow the lead and we don't question it as much as we should. We're not critical enough about it as we need to be. And so what do we need to do to get there so that we can be more aware? Because 99% of the discourse that I hear on the compact and AI for that matter, maybe AI is a little bit more balanced, but especially the compact is just gung ho for it. So how can we educate everybody or at least get the conversation going so we're a little more critical about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is our challenge, right? Like this is the piece that I still struggle with. It's interesting, as we started this conversation talking about how social work has shifted a little too far to the clinical and not the advocacy piece. And I think that it kind of this kind of fed into this space, which is now these decisions are being driven by what makes me more profitable in my clinical space rather than what is in the best interest of our clients and of the profession, right? So when we talk
Mhm.
about AI, it's about what's in what makes me the most amount of money, and if I can use AI to streamline my administrative functions or even my care functions, or if I can use these therapeutics now that everybody's hyping, that like is a mobile app that I can charge you for while you in between sessions, right? Um, then that's what's driving these decisions. Like I was at a conference in Philly just recently where I did a keynote presentation on AI, and the one of the vendors was acting like it was promoting and acting like how you go into to get your oil changed, and you just want your oil changed, and then they like open up everything else and they try to get
Mhm.
you to do all those things. Like this was what the vendor was using AI for and was promoting to large agencies of this person will come in for a basic level of care, and here's all the things we can upcharge them with, right? And the critical policy driven social worker I would hope would say, "Whoa, that's really not what we do," right? Like we're not about how much money can I milk out of you. It's about how do I get you into a place that you know that you're a little bit more stable, that you're a little bit more logically able to interact in the world. How do I get you to a better place? Not how do I milk as much money out of you as I possibly can. But that's what's driving some of these decisions. And I think we're seeing that with the compact, which is the individuals driving the conversation around the compact are about, well, I had a client once that moved out of state and I wanted to keep seeing them, but instead I have to do this, or I have 4 licenses right now, and I don't want to have to do the work of 4 licenses. But we're not stopping to have the conversation to say, from a policy perspective, is this in the best interest of our clients? Is this the best interest for the profession? I think this ties into like the pushback that we got when we changed the ASWB exam in Illinois, right? Like we removed the exam in Illinois at the LSW level, and then a few years later, advocates came to NASW and legislators and were like, "No, we want to do this for the LCSW too," and we came up with an alternative. Um, but the amount of pushback, Christian, from those that had already climbed the ladder and had already
Mhm.
kicked the ladder out, um, created so much animosity. I still get stuff back from folks that are convinced that by pushing this, we're destroying social work. But those decisions aren't about a critically analysis of what those high stakes tests actually judge. It doesn't show whether this shows an indication of competency, ethical practice, or future success. Um, if you look at the data, they are just a barrier to access. For certain populations, it's even worse,
Mhm.
right? A- In no world, would a social worker at its core say these are a good thing and not want to advocate for something else. And yet when we go into the real world situation, we now have clinicians that are like, you can't change that. That might affect how many dollars I make. I'm scared about the what ifs, so the chicken little aspects of it. Of if you get rid of the test, is that going to make us less professional? Are we not going to be able to
Right.
bill as high? Right. And so, like, one of the problems that we're facing is that because we shifted to the clinical and because it's all revenue driven now, social workers aren't thinking critically about how do we tear down systems, what systems need to be reimagined, what systems aren't working for us, right? um,
Mhm.
the ASWB exam, National Association of Black Social Workers called it years ago before it ever was created, that this was going to be a problem, that this was going to lock out certain populations. uh, and the social work profession decided to do it anyway. They said, hey, psychs are doing it, we're not going to look at how the test came about, right? We're not going to look at the historical racist background of high stakes exams in medical professions. But what we're going to do is say, if we can get some of the respect that Sykes had at the time, then we can build more and we can make more revenue. So we're just going to do it. And then there were groups that were like, hey, no, like some of us have disabilities and we don't test well, or some of us have anxieties and we don't test well. And we still said, hey, you know what? It's okay because we can make more money if we just duplicate what's already out there. Um, and you would think that, as time goes on, we would stop and go, hey, let's rethink this, right? It worked, right? It worked. Social work is one of the most respected professions now. You Social work is making money in clinical care. It worked, but at some point we've never taken the stop and said, what harm have we created and how do we dismantle that harm? And when we do dismantle that harm, when we do try to address some of the harm that we've created, Christian, what shocked me and it disappointed me about the profession the most is that how many folks that are like, don't do that because it might affect me, not because it's not a good idea, not because that barrier hasn't seriously harmed large
Yeah.
swaths of population of folks that went to the same MSW programs as you, took the same exams, submitted the same papers, but because of a test that wasn't written for them, can't can't practice in this profession, can't move up in their profession. um, like the amount of individuals that have passed this exam that are so adamant about us reimagining what it means to be a confident social worker is tremendously large. Christian is probably the most feedback I've gotten back, negative feedback we've gotten back on any legislation we ever did, was to try to say, hey, these tests don't work. We know the tests don't work. We know the tests are harming certain populations. Let's do something else. Um, and the same group that that prides themselves for tearing down barriers and dismantling systems said, wait, that's my system, that's my barrier, don't take that one down. And so when you talk about like how do we, how do we get social workers to look at AI, how do we get them to look at this critically at the social work compact, how do we get them to look critically at the the ASWB exams, I think we've got to figure out how do we get social workers to critically challenge long held beliefs and institutions and structures, um, in a way that's not just recognize that there's a problem, but want to dismantle those too, right, and rebuild something else.
Yeah, it makes me think of that panel that we were part of at the NSW conference where Dr. Singer did that poll about who do you trust in social work, and the answers were the NASW and Brene Brown, pretty much. And so
Right.
there's
Right.
not, that discourse, that critical discourse is not happening. But I wonder if we might, for my students who, ironically enough, may not even know what the ASWB exams are. Let's talk about that because you've had such a role and you kind of dismantled it in Chicago. Do you mind just telling us a little bit about what it is, what they are, and maybe go into that and talk about the story about what you did in I know at least in Illinois, but was it Nevada as well or just Illinois?
No, just in Illinois. Although since we did it in Illinois, Minnesota created alternatives to the exam. Um, Massachusetts, or Rhode Island, sorry, and Utah have both eliminated the base level MSW LSW exam. Um, and so and there's about another 5 other states that are looking at alternatives or to remove it at the base level. So when you complete your program, right? And you want to get licensed as a social worker so that you can work. We have this institution that was created, that administers the exam that allows to say that you have competency. Competency. Now we're not talking advanced. We're talking you are competent at social work so that you can practice. Um, in a lot of states, they've actually this company ASWB has managed to uh, create relationships within your licensing board to not just guarantee that you have to take their exam, but you have to take all their exams. You have to go through the steps to go through them. So they'll have a BSW exam, they'll have an MSW exam, they'll have an LCSW exam, independent clinical. And so that you have to pass your MSW exam before you can even collect your hours in a lot of states for that independent clinical exam. And so the system has been designed so that you have to pay this independent company money to take their test and money to retake their test. Uh, and so at no point have we stopped to look at these tests and said, hey, what are the success rates of these tests weeding out individuals that are not competent, again, base level, competent, to do social work? We just relied on them. And one of the reasons we relied on them is, like I said, they've built relationships within those licensing entities in those states. And so what people don't understand about ASWB is they're a membership organization themselves too, just like NASW. But their members are the licensing boards. And so the licensing boards of social workers are members of ASWB, and then ASWB is a profit-driven company that sells tests back to the licensing board. Not only that, but in several states, ASWB provides an administrative fee to those licensing boards for referring clients to the ASWB exam, right? So it is an institution that has been set up to basically gatekeep social work from certain populations and certain individuals. In theory, it's supposed to show professionalism, right? It's kind of this. It's the same model that was created for psychs, but it was before that doctors. And if you look back at history, it was created for doctors for the purposes of keeping certain populations out of medical professions, right? Um, but it became the institutional standard. It became the standard for professionalism. If you want to be a professional degree, you needed to have a standardized exam, and so those standardized exams serve as those gatekeeping across all professions that are in those that, at this level. So counselors, MFTs, all of them have that. For years in Illinois, for years, we were hearing from individuals that have with disabilities, with testing anxieties, black and brown social workers, that they were failing the test at a much higher rate than their peers in the same class, and often peers that they felt didn't have a strong enough grasp of those of the concepts, and yet they were still passing this exam at a higher rate. And for years, we were asking ASWB for that data. Show us the data. Show us the racial breakdown of your exams. Show us how you're addressing bias within your exams. And for years, ASWB wouldn't provide it. In fact, I was on a call once, Christian, where it was me and my boss, and we were in a call with their former CEO, and the guy just kept saying, "Trust us, trust us. It's not bias. Trust us." Of course, no one trusted ASWB. When somebody who has data won't show you the data that says "trust me," that's a good indication that you shouldn't trust this individual. Um, well, eventually the pressure got too hot. I think Minnesota legislature, built in that the ASWB exam had to release this data. High stakes exams that the state was going through, and ASWB released it, and the data was damning. It absolutely, like, less than half of African Americans in the state were passing this exam, where 80% of their white colleagues were passing this exam. And you can look at the exam and understand how this is, right? The exam is written from a certain perspective that doesn't take real world experiences and real life into account. you know uh there was a practice exam question that I think was a that one of the witnesses brought up, and I might be paraphrasing just a little bit, but it'll give you the idea. The practice exam question was, if you're seeing court mandated parole mental health, right? Somebody who's formerly incarcerated that is seeking mental health as part of their parole process, um, and the client doesn't show up, what's the first thing that you should do? And the answers were roughly, talk to your supervisor, call the client, call friends or family of the client, report it to the parole officer. The correct answer is D. From a legal perspective, they have a legal responsibility to report that individual to a parole officer. No ethical social worker should be calling a parole officer before at least attempting to find out if there's a reason why this individual didn't show up, right? And so when we take out your lived experiences and your community experiences and and we say, no, you have to pass an exam that we wrote from a certain perspective, you're going to see those disparities and pass. That doesn't mean that those individuals are less confident that didn't pass that exam. And what we found in Illinois by removing the test, is that there is zero correlation between competency and ethical uh, discipline or reports, versus those that passed the test for those that bypassed the exam. In Illinois, when we removed the MSW, so you have an MSW, and you come to Illinois, or you can actually get it from another state. You can only practice in Illinois, but you have an MSW, you can get a license right after graduation. You graduate, you get your license. In fact, it's part of a lot of schools' programs. They help you fill out the application in the last month, and so you graduate, you get your license. You can start working as a social worker in Illinois. You do not have to pass the ASWB exam to become an LSW in the state of Illinois. When we did that, Christian, we doubled the amount of licensed social workers in the first year, from 5,000 to over 10,000 social workers. There were 5,000 people out there with a master's degree that we were keeping out of mental health care. We were saying, no, you can't get you can't get you can't work because you didn't pass a high stakes, biased, flawed exam. Imagine how many more people are getting services from a licensed social worker in the state now because we removed that simple barrier,
Mm.
right? And it's we removed the barrier, and those individuals now they have to have continuing education. Now they have oversight by the state. So for those out there that saying this is going to create public safety issues, no, it's a reverse. By putting them under this license, we're making sure that they stay up to date. We're making sure that those individuals, rather than them doing something like life coaching on the side or outside of the space, and not actually doing clinical care. And we're working on a report right now. You'll be the first to hear it right here. But we did an analysis of disciplinary reports prior to us removing the exam, and the disciplinary reports removing after the exam, and the disciplinary reports per 1,000 actually dramatically reduced after we removed the test. Now, I'm not saying that it reduced because we don't have a test. I'm saying the idea that the sky was going to fall because of this test, or that somehow these individuals who were fully qualified former colleagues of a lot of the folks that are licensed were going to destroy the profession if they came out here and started working without passing some standardized test. That the data shows zero of that
Mhm.
since we passed the LCSW alternative. Now, the alternative's a little different. You still have to do your clinical hours, your 3,000 clinical hours, which is still a problem. And I think something that we want to keep working on is how do we reduce the cost of that for individuals that don't have a clinical supervisor in their space. You still have to do those hours. Then you have to take the exam once, and that was a negotiation thing that we didn't want, but we had to settle with from a legislative perspective. If the test fails you that one time. You could keep taking the test as many times as you want if that's the route you want to go. And there's reasons why you may want to still pass this test eventually, just because a lot of states still require it.
Yeah.
However, in Illinois, you can do an additional 3,000 hours of professional work experience that's supervised. That is not clinical supervision. You do not have to pay a supervisor. You and you can use retro hours from the last 10 years, and they can get their LCSW since that went into effect, which was just a year ago from January. um, Less or just over 800 individuals, 800 Christian, are now LCSWs in the state from that alternative pathway. 80% are still passing the exam, right? And not hard to see how that could be possible with 80% of white test takers were doing it, and most of our social work programs are white female students. But the but of that space that's left, 800 new LCSWs. Do you want to guess how many new disciplinary reports from those 800?
Not very many.
Zero, zero, zero. And we knew it was not. We knew this data would show. We knew this data would show from the jump, because you know what? Every state right now has people that are LCSWs, whether you've passed this law or not, that have never passed that exam. You didn't have to pass the exam to be an LCSW in the previous days, and everybody was that had it in the past were grandfathered in or grandparented in, right? So like the the idea that this test was somehow how social work is professional, the data doesn't show that. What it does show, though, unequivocally, is that it does serve as a barrier to access for certain populations. It does serve as a way to keep certain populations out of this profession, despite us recruiting them, but despite us asking those populations to go down this road. It does serve as that barrier to those populations ever being able to work in the field, right? Like
Mhm.
our universities are still taking their money, and they're not standing up to the fact that their students that they're recruiting in these from these communities are not passing that exam, right? Like this is one of those places where I look and say, like, how does a profession built on dismantling systems that are oppressive with a straight face look at you and say, but we're going to hold this one up because that's us, right? Like that's ours. That's our barrier. That's our racist test. That's our system that makes sure that because I passed the exam, that I can still make more money, right? Like the ladder in this profession, a profession built on dismantling barriers, the ladder keeps getting pulled up after people climb it. And it's a place that, like, if social work wants to hold its soul, it has to start critically looking at what are the things that they're doing, what are the barriers that they're creating, and what institutions are they holding up that need to be dismantled and changed.
Yeah, I have it's a common sentiment that among student graduates that I've worked with, they're like, "Well, huh? I did my 4 years, I did my advanced standing or my 2 years MSW. I'm in I went into all this debt to get there, and then, bam, I'm not done yet. I still have to pay for this exam. I still have to figure out how to pass it." Um, Among other things, getting licensure
I'm
in the
just
state.
surprised at how much pushback I get from existing licensed clinicians on pay for placement, right? Like, I actually had a clinical therapist tell me, a social worker tell me, um, that's part of being a social worker, is that learning that struggle to
That's
afford
bullshit.
100%, 100%, right? And I was like, "Wait, you're a social worker. Like, how are you saying these things?" Right? Like, I yes, you should have also been paid for that field placement. This is predatory work that we're making these individuals do. Eh, doing work that, by the way, that is not educational driven, right? The field placements are not based on the idea of I'm observing Christian, the therapist, and I'm not doing anything. I'm just gonna watch Christian, I'm gonna learn, I'm gonna ask Christian questions. That's not what's going on right now in these placements.
Mhm.
These individuals are doing group therapy. These individuals are doing LSW work in those practices, right? They are doing work for free, and not just for free. They're paying, because they're paying the university to take the class to work for free, right? If that's not a predatory practice, I don't know what is. And yet, I still have clinicians that are like, "I had to do it, so why don't they?" That's part. I literally had someone say, "This is part of social work, is learning through that struggle," and I'm like, "No, that's predatory. We need to break that up. We need to dismantle that." And how that looks, I don't know yet, right? Like, whether it's all state funding, whether it's some institutions need to start paying their interns and their field placements because they can, and they literally can. Um, or in some kind of combination of that. Like, I'm not saying that tomorrow everybody has to get paid a fair wage, and that somehow is going to work in a system that we built, that was built on predatory practices of using free labor, right? Like, if tomorrow, if I will say this, if tomorrow every social work student just went on strike, the mental health system in this country would collapse, would absolutely collapse, right? Like, so much is built on that free labor. Um, so I realize that we have to figure this out on how we're going to make that transition. But the idea that we shouldn't even make the transition is the pushback that drives me nuts. Right.
Yeah, I'm sure you're firing up some of my students if they're still here in the audience. And even for myself, just a quick story. So I was working up in Utqiagvik, Alaska, Barrow, Alaska, and I had a really good job working for the Arctic Slope Native Association, and got paid well, doing good work. Was actually grandfathered into a position that was a little higher than what I was qualified for. And for my senior year, you got to do your practicum. And so they couldn't find a practicum up there for me that worked. And so I ended up moving to Fairbanks where the university was. And so I had to quit my job, my good paying job where I was doing more, had more responsibility. I took an internship, and they told me that I couldn't get paid at an internship. So I went there, worked there, was really good at what I did, had a lot of experience working with difficult individuals. And my supervisor calls the university or emails them or whatever, the field director, and asks if I can work extra and they can pay me for it. And essentially I was just a staff. I didn't get any supervision. I didn't get anything. And so essentially they just put me to work. And I have a student at least she was in the audience earlier, is very much in the same boat, very, advanced in the work that she's able to do. And essentially she's just I shouldn't say just an employee, but she's an employee. She's not a student employee, really. She's an employee. And that you would have to quit a job that's more advanced and take a lesser job and not get paid for it. It just that there's no common sense in that, in any way, shape, or form. And I was just talking to, I can't think of her name right now, but she informed me that there's a whole organization with several chapters that are advocating for paid for placements. And so I'm going to try to hook up with them in the spring semester. But any advice you have on how we can advocate for that? Because I know my students are very passionate about that as well, about figuring out a way to get paid placements.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a couple of strategies. One, I think folks need to organize. That is the key, right? You need to organize individuals with those relationships. So, look, I work for NASW. You need to start organizing your local chapter of NASW. You need to start organizing your local chapter of National Association of Black Social Workers and Latino social workers, and anyone that may have legislative and regulatory authority to actually fix this problem, right? Or not authority, but like connections. Um, the other piece too is that, man, I hate to say it, but folks are going to have to start withholding labor, um, to drive the point of why this is predatory, right?
Mhm.
Like, here's the thing: in almost all of these placements, if they were called an internship, legally they would have to pay you. Period. Right? If you look at the federal standard for internships, they have to pay you because you have responsibilities, you have work, you're actually doing something. They have to pay you. However, we call it field placements. And somehow that changes the nature of what this role is. And so the pushback has to come from this idea of, if I'm just in a field placement, if this is just an educational experience, I shouldn't have to perform labor, do my labor, right? I shouldn't have to provide that free labor. I shouldn't be seeing clients. I shouldn't be helping you with your notes. I shouldn't be doing casework, right? Like, at its core, that's not what these students are doing. And I'm not advocating that this would be good for social work. I think social work, I think students having that opportunity to experience that and have good supervision is key to making a good social work, right? Social worker. I've been advocating for this a long time. It's not standardized tests. It's not your lectures. I'm sure, Christian, your lectures are amazing, but it's not just your lectures. It's the am I getting good supervision in those field placements? Am I getting good supervision in my clinical hours afterwards? That is a better indicator of success and of competency. So, like, we need that space. But right now, what we have is a population without who have been disempowered, right? Because they're students and who are being preyed upon to provide free labor. And we've allowed that to happen. And so, like, yes, I think the social work profession is going to need to step up and say, we're not going to allow this. But I don't think that that's going to happen with the way that the social work profession sits right now, because the people that in the social work profession that has the authority or has the ability to do it, they've already gone through their field placements. It doesn't affect them, right? It's kind of like why there's so much pushback for the ASWB exam. They've already passed the exam. This doesn't
Mhm.
affect them. And they're not looking back at should we break down that institution, which means that it's going to be upon the students to ultimately withhold labor. It's going to be upon the students to ultimately organize and force those universities, force CSWE, force NASW, force these groups to finally change how we do our systems. Now, and the second one is, I think that the students need to be also very, and some of them are already doing this work, I want to be really clear, but strategic on aligning themselves with other professions that are in the very same fight. In a lot of states, student teaching is an unpaid field placement, right? And right in a lot of states, student teaching is actually making inroads to allow this to be paid. In some states, nurses is an unfield placement, not most, but in some. Tying yourself back to this idea of, there are other folks that are fighting the same fight, and how do we align ourselves into that same space? Because in Illinois, we've tried now 3 years in a row to pass a bill that would require the state to provide resources to fund field placements in agencies that could not afford to provide funding for those field placements. And we're not talking full pay. We're just like, can you give them a stipend at least for their work, right? Something.
Mhm.
And we've had no success, even with all of our relationships, even with all our strengths. Um, but there's but there is some movement with the teachers, student teachers, and there is some movement with tying social work in with that population, so that maybe we can get it through that route, right? And so I would encourage folks to figure out, like, who else is in this fight right now for paid field placements, for paid internship schoolwork, um, and how can social work align themselves with those fights? Because, you know when those states find those priorities, the money's there. It just has to be the priority. Like, every state right now is saying, there's no money for new programs. But if you take a look at their budget, they funded new programs, right? Like,
Mhm.
in Illinois, I've been constantly told that there's no funding for paid field placements in our budget right now. But in last year's budget, they found $40 million to pay for a school's sports facilities. Like, it's matter of priorities, right? And so, how do we make that a priority? And it unfortunately, this is not one where I trust the grown-ups are going to help out the way that they should. I feel like this is a place where students are going to have to organize and and force those institutions, force the you know elected officials to move this ball forward.
Yeah, and just going back to that whole idea of since I had to do it, then you should have to do it is such a terrible argument.
It's
If
horrible,
you had to do it and you struggled through it, then you should be advocating for other folks not to be able to
horrible.
do it. I think it's the same thing with people think different things about student loans, but a lot of students get roped into these student loans. And this is, well, I had to work and pay for it. Well, then you should empathize even more, that somebody got roped into those things, and that shouldn't be a lifetime punishment for them. But
I
Monica
don't think
said
those are
you
words
should,
that any ethical social worker should ever say, is, "I had to do it, so you should too."
yeah.
If it's an if it's if it's something that, um, caused you harm, caused you stress, that risked your ability to get through your programs, or, like, at no point should you say, "I had to do it. I somehow got through it. You should get through it too." And we need to stop with the thought process of those that got through it are somehow more competent than those that didn't. No, you had other benefits, or other benefits that were given to you or you were provided that allowed you to get through that barrier. But that doesn't mean that the barrier is valid, right?
Just like
Like
all that evidence you presented earlier. That's just
uh,
dismissing all of it.
it doesn't, like, just because you were able to go through social work school and work for free and still put food in your mouth doesn't mean that that's the right thing. That
Mhm.
we should make people work for free because you were able to, because you had those kind of privileges and those resources to get through social work school, and somehow survive not being paid for their work. I mean, like, I did a flash survey in Nevada, and 40% of the students were working full time, doing a free paid field placement while attending classes. 40%. They did that in school. That's not tenable for anyone, right?
Mhm.
Like, how can anybody who's an ethical social worker look at that and go, "Well, I did it, you should do it." No, like, that's a problem, we should fix it. You shouldn't have had to
Mhm.
done it. You should have been paid. You should have been paid for your work too. So
Yeah.
let's figure out how do we work together to get that, so then the next group doesn't have to go through that struggle. So we don't lose students mid education because they have to make the choice of, I have to pay for my house, or my housing, or my family needs additional resources, and I can't afford to just work for free. In Illinois, we have this school social work professional educator's license. So it's this. I hate it, but it's something that was built long before me. And what it did was it basically said that, while you're in school. For social work, for your MSW, you can get a specialty in school social work, and it's two additional classes plus your field placement is actually in a school, right? That's the only difference, by the way. Everybody graduates with an MSW. Only a certain percentage of folks graduate with an MSW with a school specialty. If you don't get that school specialty and want to work as a school social worker, you have to go back to college to and take on more debt and do a new field placement in order to work in schools, even though you have the same MSW, even though you have the same MSW that we're referring those very same students out to for clinical care, right? But you can't work in the schools unless you go back to college and take these two classes and the internship all over again. Now, can you imagine somebody who's a full time right now, who's employed as a full time social worker, saying, "Let's let's stop working as a social worker and then go do a field placement for free for a year." Like, and they're wondering why they have a social work shortage, right? Like, they're wondering, why don't we have these kind of things? Now, one of the things that NASW and I was able to advocate with our coalition group was to say, hey, how about we pay them, let them work as a school social worker as their field placement. And it took a while, and it took a lot of groups opposing it. We finally got to a place where now in Illinois you can go through this program where, you don't have your license yet, but you can work as a school social worker under supervision by a school social worker, and then take those two classes still, and then get your PEL. Now they still have a high stakes test that I would love to get rid of. That's just really super biased and horrible too. But like, we were able to at least create that one little bridge. But again, Christian, you would be surprised how many people were opposed to this idea of, well, no, that's not a field placement, that's an employment, right? But like the workload is more, like the experience is more, the knowledge set is more. Why can't we compensate them for that work? You know, it, it's just frustrating right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Monica added in the chat, she said that I was told that the agency that I'm serving my practicum hours at will no longer be accepting students after me. I think that myself and another MSW student they had gave them too much pushback, and they were surprised we would actually speak up for ourselves. And she's the one I was talking about that's kind of treated as a staff member.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, but I think this gets to the root of what I'm talking about, which is that we have a divide between existing social workers and their belief of I had to do it, why do you?
Hmm.
And a new group of social workers that are saying, hey, can I question that? And I hope that the new group of social workers eventually wins on these issues, um, and doesn't assimilate into this mindset as they somehow get past these barriers, right? Um, and this is a perfect example. I've heard it too. I've heard clinician or agency heads tell me, if we get paid field placement requirements, we just won't do internships. And I'm like, no, you will, you will, you will. Or we can't afford field placements. You can, right? Like your alternatives are you're going to have to pay a full-time employee, and you're not paying full-time employee with benefits. We know that, right? Like this is predatory in nature. It's kind of the same arguments that we constantly hear, but you can't raise the minimum wage, or like I'll have to close, or I'll automate. No, they're still using servers, right? You're still, those restaurants are still open. You're still able to pay those things. Illinois raised the minimum wage, and we still have businesses in Illinois. The sky didn't fall. I think the same thing's true with social work. I think um, I realize though that in these cases, right, where individuals where they've been in this field for a long time, they went through it without field placements, and they feel like they don't, the next group should have to go through the same things that they do, are going to be a barrier. But they're a barrier for any kind of reform within social work. And just because it's social work, and this is the lesson I've learned, and I'm not happy about it, but just because it's social work, it doesn't mean that those people aren't going to hold the same resistance to change that any other profession or any other entity is going to have, right?
Hmm.
Like there is nothing special about social work destroying systems and barriers in their own field. There's nothing special about it.
Yeah.
The same people, Christian, that would fight tooth and nail to tear down those systems in other professions and scream on social media and protest against certain things, will be the same people that will defend to their death to keep those barriers and those things in place into their own profession. And that's a place where social work has to have an introspective look, and it has to start calling themselves out.
Yeah, you got to take that plank out of your own eye before you take it out of
That's
your
right.
brother's eye.
That's right.
Uh, Alice got a question for you. She says, if the social work student is unlicensed, how do the companies justify billing for their work if they don't have a direct supervisor signing off on what they're doing?
So, I mean, I wonder if Alice is referring to they're actually doing it, because they are, right. Like a lot of places, the supervisor is billing for those. Um, there's actually a law in Illinois now that just went in effect. Well, will take effect in January, that will allow those agencies to bill for field placement work. So like it'll be a formalized practice. But I do know of agencies that are doing it, right? That are already in states that it's not even permissible, where you're seeing social workers that are working, doing their clinical hours for their LCSW, that their clinical independent clinical, where the supervisor is just billing under their name. We're seeing it in agencies or schools, where students are doing these field placements, and the school is billing Medicaid for those services that the students did under the supervisor's name. And then at the same time, they're saying we can't afford to pay those students, right? We can't afford to pay for that labor. Um, for us, the issue is, let's take away the excuse, like let's make it legal for them to bill for those services. And then the argument is why aren't you paying your students?
Yeah. Well, Kyle, I'm running out of time here, but I have another question. I have two more questions for you. One is, I see a lot of conversation going on about the the Trump administration removing social work education from a, I'm not sure the right correct language, but as a professional degree. Do you know anything about that and have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a twofold thing, right? So at its core, it's just the former rule allowed for certain professions to have access to student loans and some loan forgiveness programs and some other benefits based on the fact that they were professional licensed. So the existing language basically said these professions, but not limited to, right? Um, and over the years, the federal government has looked at all these professions, including social work, and said you are definitely in the not limited to. Under the new proposed rules, they're getting rid of the not limited to, right? The idea is that the folks that were understood to be included into that section would no longer be included into that section. It serves two purposes, and you can look to Project 2025 to understand how it serves two purposes, right? The first one is it drives you away from getting government funded loans, which are much more affordable, um, and drives you into the private sector, right? So which is the intent. Whether they want to have less risk at the government side, and they want you to go to the private sector and pay their business friends for your student loans, where it's a lot harder to get out of them. It's a lot harder to get to negotiate deals through them, um, and so that's core number one. The second piece of it is, and you can look to Project 2025 to understand this, is that they have this flawed belief that if there's less money available to the students, the universities will cut cost, right? And so, like, there, we can look at that and like hold that to be like, I get it, I understand it, right? The idea of the costs for tuition, the cost of universities have skyrocketed
Mhm.
at a much higher rate than inflation, a much higher rate than people can afford. People are taking on massive amounts of debt that our previous generations didn't have to do, right? Comparatively to their income. And so there's a Republican belief that if we take away those funds, the universities will lower the costs, as if magically you can pay people less and the cost of running those buildings is less, and et cetera, right? And so, what the reality, of course, is going to be is that certain populations won't be able to afford a master's program in social work, a master's in counseling, a master's in nursing. You know, what we're looking at is those advanced degrees are going to very, very problematic from an access of funds, and so there will be a disparity who will be have access to them if this rule goes into effect. There will be some states that will step in and provide state loans to help subsidize the fact that they're no longer available in the feds. But then you're looking at which states is that going to be, right? The Californias, the Illinois, the New Yorks type of states, and where large swaths of the country, those states weren't going to take on that risk, and they aren't going to take on those loans. um, and so it is really problematic. Now on a bigger scale, by not calling it a professional degree, it makes it a little easier also to make the case that conservatives have often made in the spaces, which is, these professions should be delicensed. These professions should be deprofessionalized, right? Um, and so, if you are someone who believes in that and reducing the amount of licenses that we have in in the country for these professional degrees, removing the federal government from seeing them as professional degrees does help your arguments with that space, right? I will tell you, Christian, um, there's nothing that's going on in the federal government that I can say for sure won't happen. I feel like this one has seen so much pushback that there will be some modifications to this rule before it becomes actual rule. Um, and I'm hope that that's the case. I know that the Nurses Association is mobilized, NASW is mobilized, so there's some psychs have mobilized, and that they're using their resources to try to push back on this piece for very good reason. But I do think that if this does become the rule, and this administration, everything that seems logical isn't the thing that passes, right? Um, but if it does become, I think you're going to see some real pain for low income individuals who we've recruited into social work programs to not be able to go get that master's. And in social work, unless you're planning to deprofessionalize social work, which is might be their goal too, right? To say BSWs now can do clinical care. Unless you're going to deprofessionalize social work, what you're really going to see is only wealthy individuals are going to have access to those higher degrees and those higher compensated salaries. So it's really problematic, but it's just kind of a, an indicator of where this administration is headed, to be honest with you. I mean, we're only in year one, and we're already talking about deprofessionalizing advanced nurses, social workers, counselors. It, I can't imagine what we're going to see over the next 3 years.
Yeah, we're hoping the pushback is strong enough, like you said, it doesn't go through. And I think it also, should bring us a little more urgency in the conversation about it costing so much to become a social worker and how ethical it is or how nefarious it is for somebody got to take out 100K plus in debt to be a social worker. That's not
I think
fair. And
it's a
it's
valid. I think that is 100% a valid conversation. I don't think removing the funds from individuals that are low income to have access to the same programs that self-funded individuals are is the right path to do this conversation. But absolutely, I think
Mhm.
there is no rhyme or reason. The same thing about why we have the SWB exam. There's no rhyme or reason why grad programs require that many degree hours, credit hours. Other than it's revenue generating, right? There's no rhyme or reason why we need to charge students 8 hours of university dollars, 8 credits of university for a field placement. There's no rhyme or reason for that. Like they're not getting compensated for it, and they're getting what, 1 hour a week. Like there's things that internally the universities are going to need to do that they could do to make things competitive. I saw a university in Chicago, a Loyola University, actually reduce the amount of credits that you need for a graduate program to get an MSW. They combine certain classes and policy classes integrated into some of the existing ones to reduce the total amount of credits. Now, that's not to say that Loyola isn't still expensive. It is obnoxiously expensive to get a degree there. But like, there's no reason, there's nothing set in stone that says that your university has to have that many credits in order to get an MSW. Like, that's a conversation that needs to be had with CSWE. That's a conversation that schools could have right now, that could be looking at how do I reduce the amount of credit hours that you need for an MSW so that we can actually reduce the amount of debt that these students are taking on as they go forward. I'm with you on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you do the math, and people really don't have enough time to do everything you're supposed to do in an advanced standing, anyways. Even, you add a family, a job, whether it's a part-time job, whatever, a practicum, 5 graduate classes, the time you're supposed to spend in class and out of class, the math doesn't really add up. And so somebody's cutting corners somewhere, no matter what. It's just the way that it is.
Yeah.
But I got to get going, Kyle. I had just one last question for you: Is do you have any last words? Anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to get out there?
No, I mean, we covered the key ones, right? Like, but I would just say, challenge challenge the systems. Just keep challenging. Like for your students, like just question it. And I know certain professors aren't going to like that. I know certain entities aren't going to like that. The institutions that exist aren't going to like that. But challenge those. But then I would also say this, and this is the one my one advice is, you don't have to tear down the institution. You just need to reform it, because rebuilding from scratch an institution is virtually impossible and rarely succeeds.
Mhm.
But reforming it is absolutely possible. And so, what I would encourage folks to do is, challenge these folks and these institutions and these groups, including my own employer, on certain things that they hold and there's certain things that they do, right? Like NASW is a collective. It's a collective of social work. It's a collective of your peers. Not all of your peers share the same values or in the same position as you are. So challenge that and then reform it. Get involved, do things, and make some change because you know people are going to put you in a line. Don't follow. You don't have to stay in that line. There are other places that you can walk.
Yeah, make your own road
Make
and,
it.
make the path by walking it. But that's great advice, Kyle. And I'm glad that you ended with that because that's what I'm talking to my students all the time. And if the institution or the professor or whoever doesn't like it, all the more to stand up for yourself. And I've seen very positive results, whether that's just standing up for yourself at a practicum agency or whatever. But stand up for yourself, advocate for what you believe and what's in your heart and in your consciousness and when you look at things critically. So I really appreciate you, Kyle. It's been a wonderful conversation. I learned a lot. I can't wait to get this up and published and shared with the broader social work, critical social work community that's listening in, and especially to my students. And I hope we can have that we can continue the relationship and have another conversation somewhere down the road and
Love
collaborate
to.
somehow.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Enjoy your holiday, man.
Yeah, you too. Thanks again for your time and your wisdom, Kyle. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, take care.